Frankenstein Tanks. In pretty much every major war of the last century, tanks have been fused with other vehicles to produce Frankenstein tanks. These armored abominations were usually created out of either necessity or desperation, and can most recently be found in Ukraine, filling in the gaps in the Russian army. In March 2023, due to heavy losses, it was reported that the Russians were stitching tanks together with leftover parts. Tanks augmented with overhead cages, scraps of scavenged armor, and even wooden logs for extra protection have been observed by perplexed eyewitnesses. Among the most hideous of these monstrosities includes a 1950s-era naval anti-aircraft turret strapped to a Soviet MTLB amphibious fighting vehicle. The Russians, however, are by no means the first to cross tanks together in such a way, and are in fact following a long-established military tradition. The Jagdpanzer 38 Hetzer. The Jagdpanzer 38 was a hybrid German-Czech tank destroyer, and the most successful example of a Nazi Frankenstein tank was first assembled after Hitler's invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1938. It was here in this occupied territory that the German officers discovered that the Czechs had been developing the LTVZ-38, a modern tank furnished with a Skoda A7 37mm cannon and a Praga inline six-cylinder engine and having a crew of 4. The 38 was soon modified by Nazi engineers who opted to keep the engine but swapped the main armament for the ferocious 75mm Pak-39, which could fire devastating tungsten-infused PZGR-40 anti-tank rounds, able to penetrate 97mm of armor at 1,000 meters. They also enlarged the 4 rubber-tired steel road wheels but retained the original Czech chassis lined with riveted armor. Because it was rather hastily assembled, the vehicle had a number of disadvantages. Due to the width of the hull, the Pak-39 had to be mounted to the right-hand side, meaning its maneuverability was limited to only 5 degrees left and 11 degrees right. In addition, the crew compartment was extremely cramped, and in order to reload the remote-controlled MG-34 7.92mm machine gun, the gunner had to pop out of the hatch and expose himself to enemy fire. On the other hand, with a 99% chance of a first shot hit at 500 meters, in combat the Jagdpanzer 38's low profile meant it was very easy to camouflage and launch surprise attacks on unsuspecting enemy tanks. As a result, it was deployed on all of Germany's fronts, remaining a popular tank destroyer for Wehrmacht forces. Although not its official name, the German troops later fondly referred to it as the Hetze, which translates as the harasser or chaser. This video is sponsored by Crossout. In this futuristic combat simulator, you can craft unique combat vehicles from the ground up and pit them against one another in PvP and PvE battles. Using thousands of different parts from a variety of factions, you can customize your vehicles and your gameplay style to suit your own preferences. One of my favorite components of this warfare game is the ability to blast off individual components from my opponent's vehicles. Even though it's set in a post-apocalyptic world, the realism here adds a level of immersion that I can appreciate. As a historical channel, I love that these vehicles take inspiration from real machines of war, even if we are suspending our belief in gameplay. New to the Sky Raiders update, you can fly. Using helicopter rotor technology, you can take your traditional land-based vehicles and send them skywards to punish your opponents like never before. With map types designed specifically for flying vehicles, there has never been a better time to become a sky raiding tactician. Utilizing the global faction war mode, battle for supremacy, using either the Khaganate or Brotherhood, and get some of the most valuable loot in the game, with decisive victories to impact the prize pool in real time. Play Crossout now for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox using the link in the description below. Get yourself the Massive Adventure Seeker bonus pack or the Hardened bonus pack for existing players and fly your Sky Raiders helicopter today. The Skank anti-aircraft tank. During the Second World War, it became apparent that tanks were vulnerable to enemy aircraft, and mobile anti-air protection would be needed. To this end, the Canadian government authorized the creation of a dedicated anti-aircraft tank, which could keep up with the pace of other armored units. Development began in March 1943. Officially designated the Tank AA 20mm Quad Skank, the vehicle was based on the Grizzly 1 medium tank, an M4 Sherman built by the Canadian government under license. Though the Sherman was a simple and easily modifiable chassis, development was plagued by issues. The turret for the Skank was initially welded from steel plates and designed to contain 4 Hispano-Suiza 20mm cannons. After some testing, it was determined that the welded turret was too difficult to manufacture, so a cast turret was developed instead. This led to issues, as the cast turret was difficult to balance on the chassis and had to be redesigned. Once this issue was sorted out, another problem was encountered. It was decided that the Hispano-Suiza cannons were no longer suitable since the ammunition was in such short supply. The turret once again had to be redesigned to fit Polston cannons, a simplified version of the Oerlikon guns used by Canadian forces. This led to another issue, as the Polston guns could only be fed by 30-round magazines. There was an attempt to create a belt-fed Polston gun for use on the tank, but these were unsuccessful, and again, redesigning the turret for yet another different gun was unacceptable, so the magazine-fed guns were installed. While the turret issues were being ironed out, other modifications were made. The electrical system needed upgrading from the Grizzlies, as the power requirements to turn the turret were much greater on the Skank. As a result, a turret could complete a full rotation in 6 seconds, twice as fast as a standard turret. By the time these problems were fixed and the Skank ready to enter production, the Luftwaffe had been virtually wiped out, negating the need for its services. One of the vehicles did make it to the front lines. Attached to the 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade, the Skank arrived in Antwerp on January 24, 1945. During its few months of service, they only spotted 1 enemy aircraft, and that was too far away to engage. Overall, only 3 Skanks were produced, with turrets for 8 more to be fitted onto Grizzly hulls completed when the project was cancelled. The BT-42. Following the Soviet invasion of Finland in 1939, the Finns realized they were woefully underprepared in the tank and armor department. Looking to replace their fleet of outdated French FT-17s, Army officials suggested their stockpile of captured BT-7 Soviet tanks could be modified with QF 4.5-inch Mark II howitzers that had been previously shipped to them by the British. These spare guns, which had been renamed 114 PSV H-18 by the Finns, were subsequently fitted onto 18 turretless BT-7s to create the BT-42, which entered service in 1943. This Frankenstein tank was generally despised by its operators for a number of reasons. The extremely heavy howitzer gun not only slowed it down and made it an easy target, but proved very ineffective against fast-moving Soviet tanks with sloped armor. Moreover, when the turret was hit, the rivets it had partly been assembled with could turn into deadly shrapnel shards, while the 4 slits built into it provided a terrible field of vision. It also had unprotected rear doors instead of armored hatches, making its crew extremely vulnerable to enemy fire. And owing to its weight, the BT-42 was plagued with stability issues, such as overstressed suspension and transmission, which made it difficult to maintain. Finally, because the cockpit was extremely cramped, there was little room for ammunition, which had to be constantly ferried to the crew with supply vehicles. Unsurprisingly, this failed experiment performed terribly in the field. During a 1944 Soviet offensive in Vyborg, for example, 8 out of 9 BT-42s were destroyed after scoring no kills, with 1 unit hitting an advancing Soviet T-34 tank 18 times without stopping it. Following this dismal showing, the BT-42s were swiftly abandoned and replaced with superior German Sturmgeschütz 3 tanks. The NI tank. Between August 8th to October 16th, 1941, as the Nazis besieged the Black Sea port of Odessa, one of the most unusual mutant vehicles ever created was born. With Soviet forces being depleted rapidly and the Germans closing in, engineers at the January Uprising mechanical plant hurriedly developed a tank based on the STZ-5 series of agricultural tractors. The NI tank retained the tractor's track and wheel arrangement, which was grafted to a crude box made from metal, wood, and rubber above that acted as a rudimentary crew compartment. On top of this was attached a turret, sometimes ripped directly from a wrecked tank, which typically housed a 7.62mm machine gun. Other variants reported to have assimilated even larger weapons than this, such as 37mm mountain guns and 45mm anti-tank armaments. The NI tank was first presented on August 20th to a crowd of factory workmen, Soviet officials, and news reporters, where it performed a 360-degree turn. Due to the engine rattling on the hull, when it moved, the NI tank made an ear-splitting noise. Despite this, the tank underwent combat testing between August 28th and September 3rd, and 70 more of them were ordered by the Odessa Military Council. Hardly anything is known about its combat effectiveness, since the Germans overran Odessa before they were produced on a larger scale. Following the fall of Odessa on October 16th, the NI tanks were abandoned in the streets, while 2 were captured by Nazi-aligned Romanian forces and either scrapped or used for training afterwards. Type 64 Hybrid. In the 1970s, the Republic of China, or Taiwan, sought to upgrade its tank force in order to help defend against a possible invasion from its more powerful neighbor. Rather than develop a new tank from scratch, they turned to their American allies for help. What resulted from this partnership was the Type 64. The Type 64 was made from the deconstructed components of American tanks and reassembled into a new vehicle. Simply put, the tank was constructed from the hulls of donated M42 Dusters, a self-propelled anti-aircraft platform, which itself was based on the hull of the M41 Walker Bulldog light tank, with the 40mm cannons replaced with the turret of an M18 Hellcat, a World War II-era tank destroyer. The idea to use pre-existing components was economical. While vehicles already in service are no longer usable, spare parts can be cannibalized into a new vehicle without having to produce a new one from scratch, or manufacture a new set of spare parts. Overall, the internal structure of the Type 64 was almost identical to the M41, though with an upgraded electrical system. The armor was also improved with the addition of armor plating that was welded onto the turret. The main gun of the Type 64 was a 76mm cannon, which was produced locally. Other armament of the tank came in the form of a coaxial 7.62mm machine gun, as well as a 50 caliber M2 machine gun, both of which were also manufactured in Taiwan. With a crew of 4, the Type 64 is classified as a light tank, weighing in at around 25 tons, small compared to other tanks. During the entire production run, around 50 of the tanks were produced, but they were intended as more of a support tank, as they would not have stood a chance in a firefight with an enemy main battle tank. There have been at least one variant produced, known as the Type 64 Experimental. It was a locally produced M41 Bulldog, with an upgraded engine, fire control systems, and communications equipment, in addition to improved armor plating. The Type 64 was in service from 1975 until 1981, when it was pulled from frontline service and used for training and reserve purposes. It goes to show that even if they do cost an arm and a leg, some Frankenstein tanks are probably better off staying in the graveyard. Play Crossout now for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox using the link in the description below. Get yourself the Massive Adventure Seeker bonus pack or the Hardened bonus pack for existing players and fly your Sky Raiders helicopter today.